two names echo through history: Antony and Cleopatra. Their romance wasn't just passion, it was politics, war, and empire. Together, they defied Rome and shaped the destiny of nations. This is the story of Rome's deadliest love affair, where hearts and empires fell alike. Throughout the long story of civilization, certain figures stand apart, their lives forever linked to the great turning points of history. Among them are Mark Antony and Cleopatra, a soldier and a queen whose fateful alliance ended a republic, began an empire, and left behind a legend that has echoed for more than 2,000 years. Mark Antony was born in 83 BC, in a city already consumed by chaos. The Roman Republic, a state that had conquered half the known world, was tearing itself apart from within. Civil wars had shaken its foundations, and ambition had replaced virtue as the driving force of politics. Into this age of turmoil came Antony Marcus Antonius, as the Romans called him, a man destined to ride the storm. Antony's family was old, but not among the greatest of Rome's nobility. His father, Marcus Antonius Creticus, had been a naval commander of modest reputation, while his mother, Julia, was a distant relative of Julius Caesar. Though not born into immense wealth, Antony inherited something far more valuable: a name, connections, and the burning desire to rise. From a young age, Antony learned that Rome rewarded daring men. The Republic was built on conquest, and its politics were dominated by generals whose legions made and unmade power. As a boy, he watched as civil war swept across the city, as the generals Sulla and Marius fought for control of the state. When the smoke cleared, the republic that emerged was a shadow of its old self. Political power belonged not to the Senate, but to those who commanded armies. Antony came of age in this ruthless world. Handsome, athletic, and impulsive, he was everything the Roman elite both admired and feared. He was also reckless. His early years in Rome were marked by debts, drinking, and scandal. By his 20s, he had squandered much of his inheritance and was forced to leave the city to escape his creditors. Yet this exile would prove to be the making of him. Antony fled east to Greece and then to Syria, where he joined the Roman army. Here he found his calling. The discipline, the danger, the brotherhood of the legions all suited him. He rose quickly through the ranks, earning a reputation for courage and charisma. Soldiers loved him because he shared their hardships, ate their rations, and fought beside them in the dirt. He had the gift of command, and soon his superiors took notice. It was during these early campaigns in the East that Antony first heard the name Cleopatra, the daughter of Egypt's king, a child of the Nile who would one day change his life. At that time, she was little more than a princess in a distant kingdom, but her land was already a source of fascination and power. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, a land of ancient gods and immense wealth. Whoever controlled it could feed or starve Rome. While Antony's fortunes grew in the East, the politics of Rome were once again shifting. The Republic had three men at its center: Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Pompey the Great; Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome; and Julius Caesar, a rising general whose ambition was boundless. Together, they formed an alliance known as the First Triumvirate, a secret pact to control the state. But alliances in Rome never lasted long. Power always demanded a price. Caesar went north to conquer Gaul, building an empire and a legend. Pompey ruled in the east, and Crassus led an army against Parthia in the deserts of Mesopotamia. It was there, in 53 BC, that Crassus met his death, his army destroyed, his head taken by Rome's eastern rivals. The balance of power was broken. Now there were only two men left to decide the fate of Rome: Caesar and Pompey. Antony entered Caesar's service at this moment of crisis. Traveling north to Gaul, he became one of Caesar's closest lieutenants. Together they fought campaigns that stretched from the Rhine to the English Channel. Antony commanded legions in battle, earning glory and trust. Caesar, a keen judge of men, saw in Antony both strength and loyalty, a man who could inspire soldiers and hold a line when others faltered. When Caesar's enemies in the Senate tried to strip him of his command, Antony was the one who stood in the Senate House and vetoed the motion. The act marked him as Caesar's man, and when the Senate declared Caesar an enemy of the state, Antony fled north to join his commander. In January 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, a step that meant civil war. Antony rode beside him. The war that followed was brutal and decisive. Caesar marched on Rome, Pompey fled east, and the Republic fell apart. Antony fought in every major campaign from the plains of Greece to the deserts of Africa. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, Caesar defeated Pompey and became master of Rome. Antony, his most loyal officer, was rewarded with power and prestige. Yet Caesar's victory also brought new dangers. The Senate was filled with men who despised him, who saw him as a tyrant. When they struck him down on the Ides of March, Antony barely escaped with his life. The death of Caesar plunged Rome into chaos once more. His assassins claimed they had restored the Republic, but they had only opened the door to another civil war. Antony seized the moment. He delivered a funeral oration so powerful that the people of Rome turned against the conspirators. Caesar's blood was still fresh when Antony showed them the dictator's will, naming a young relative Gaius Octavius as his adopted son and heir. Antony expected to control this youth, but Octavius proved to be far more dangerous than anyone imagined. The two men formed a fragile alliance, joined by Marcus Lepidus, another of Caesar's allies. Together, they became known as the Second Triumvirate, sharing the rule of Rome. Antony took the east as his domain, Octavian the west, and Lepidus Africa. It was a temporary peace, a division of power that could never last. Both men knew that only one of them would eventually rule Rome. For Antony, the east offered wealth, armies, and opportunity, and it would soon bring him face to face with Cleopatra. While Antony was carving out his power in the west, Cleopatra had already faced her own battles. Born in 69 BC, she was the last queen of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of the Greek general Ptolemy, who had served under Alexander the Great. Though her ancestors were Macedonian, Cleopatra was more Egyptian than any ruler before her. She spoke the native language, studied the customs, and embraced the ancient gods of the Nile. Her father, Ptolemy XII, had ruled a kingdom that was both rich and fragile. Egypt was the jewel of the ancient world, but it stood at the mercy of Rome. By the time Cleopatra was a teenager, Rome's generals treated Egyptian kings as clients rulers allowed to wear their crowns only with Roman permission. When her father was driven into exile, Cleopatra traveled with him to Rome and saw firsthand the power that controlled her destiny. When she returned to Egypt after her father's death, Cleopatra became queen alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. But Egypt's court was a nest of intrigue. Within months, Cleopatra was forced from the throne and driven into exile by her own advisors. Her brother's supporters ruled Alexandria, while she raised an army on Egypt's eastern frontier, waiting for the right moment to return. That moment came with the arrival of Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, Caesar pursued Pompey to Egypt, only to find that the boy king's court had murdered him. Outraged, Caesar took control of the palace. Cleopatra saw her chance. According to legend, she had herself smuggled into the palace rolled inside a carpet, and when the servants unrolled it before Caesar, the young queen emerged at his feet. The gamble worked. Caesar was captivated. Their alliance was both political and personal. Cleopatra needed Roman support to reclaim her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth to fund his wars. Together, they defeated her brother's forces and restored her as queen. The union produced a son, Ptolemy Caesar, whom the Egyptians called Caesarion Little Caesar. For a brief moment, Egypt and Rome were bound by more than politics. But Caesar's assassination ended that fragile bond. Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, her hopes tied to a dead man. For years, she ruled alone, securing her borders and restoring her country's prosperity. She was worshipped as the living goddess Isis, yet she knew that Egypt's survival depended on the ambitions of the men who ruled Rome. And one of those men, the most powerful of them all, was now coming east. By 41 BC, the Roman world was still reeling from the death of Julius Caesar. The triumvirs Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus had crushed Caesar's assassins at Philippi in Macedonia the previous year, ending the last hope for the old republic. The Senate remained, but its power was gone. Rome now belonged to its generals. Of the three rulers, Mark Antony was the most celebrated. He was Caesar's old comrade, the man who had ridden beside him through every campaign. Soldiers adored him, and in the east, his name carried weight. As governor of the eastern provinces, Antony commanded legions, ruled wealthy lands, and held the loyalty of Rome's greatest armies. He seemed every inch the conqueror. Yet beneath the triumphs and processions, Antony's position was precarious. Octavian controlled Rome itself and the western provinces, including Italy. The alliance between them was more truce than friendship. Both men knew that sooner or later, one would have to destroy the other. To secure his power, Antony needed wealth and allies. The East could provide both, but only through careful diplomacy. Many kingdoms there were not Roman provinces, but client states, independent in name, dependent in practice. Chief among them was Egypt, ruled by Cleopatra VII, the last monarch of her line. When Antony summoned the rulers of the East to meet him in Tarsus, a city in Asia Minor, Cleopatra received the order as both command and opportunity. She knew that Rome's favor could preserve Egypt or end it. But she also understood Antony's reputation. A soldier of immense appetites who responded to charm and spectacle as much as strategy. Cleopatra did not arrive in Tarsus as a supplicant. She arrived as a queen. Ancient historians tell us she sailed up the river Cydnus on a golden barge, its sails of purple silk, oars of silver, and decks perfumed with incense. She reclined beneath a canopy dressed as the goddess Isis, while boys dressed as cupids fanned her with feathers. Musicians played, and the citizens of Tarsus lined the riverbanks to watch. Antony, a man who had faced 1,000 enemies in battle, was disarmed by her presence. He invited her to dine with him, but she refused, saying it would be more fitting if he dined with her instead. He accepted. That night, Antony attended one of the most lavish feasts the ancient world had ever seen. Cleopatra's palace servants poured wine from gold vessels. The tables glittered with jewels. The queen spoke to Antony not through translators, but in his own tongue. She knew what she was doing. The following days blurred into banquets, laughter, and indulgence. Antony had found in Cleopatra a woman who matched him in wit and ambition. What began as diplomacy quickly became desire. The soldier and the queen were inseparable. Yet behind the luxury and flirtation lay calculation. Cleopatra needed Rome's protection to secure her throne against rivals, while Antony needed Egypt's wealth for the campaigns he planned. Their alliance was born from mutual need, but it soon deepened into something more dangerous. When Antony returned to Syria, Cleopatra followed him, and that winter of 41 to 40 BC became one of the most infamous in Roman history. Together, they lived not like politicians but as monarchs, staging feasts and processions that blended Egyptian splendor with Roman power. Cleopatra entertained Antony with theater, games, and endless wine. She called herself Isis incarnate. He was Dionysus, god of wine and conquest. Alexandria became their paradise, a city that never slept, where politics gave way to pleasure. But while Antony reveled in Egypt, trouble brewed in Rome. His wife, Fulvia, a strong-willed and politically astute woman, had been fighting to defend his interests against Octavian. She raised legions in Italy, even went to war, but was defeated. By the time Antony learned of it, Fulvia was dead. Her death ended one conflict, but left another unresolved. The Roman people whispered that Antony had abandoned his duties for an Eastern queen. Octavian spread the same rumor, quietly planting the idea that Antony no longer belonged to Rome. Realizing the danger, Antony returned west. In 40 BC, he met Octavian at Brundisium, and the two men negotiated peace. To seal their alliance, Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia, a virtuous and respected woman whose grace was meant to restore his image. For a time, it worked. Octavia accompanied Antony to Greece and bore him 2 daughters. The union seemed to signal a return to order, but the illusion could not last. Cleopatra still ruled in Alexandria, and Antony's heart remained with her. As Rome's fragile peace continued, Antony turned again to the east. His ambitions were vast. Like Caesar before him, he dreamed of conquering Parthia, the great empire that had humiliated Rome years earlier when Crassus fell at Carrhae. Such a victory would make him supreme. With Egypt's gold, he could finance the campaign. With Cleopatra's ships, he could supply it. In 36 BC, Antony marched east with more than 16 legions. Cleopatra joined him in Syria, providing grain, money, and troops. She was more than an ally now. She was his partner in power. Together they imagined a new order of fusion of Rome and Egypt, ruled by them and their children. But Antony's Parthian campaign was a disaster. The deserts were merciless, his allies unreliable, and the enemy elusive. Harassed by cavalry and cut off from supplies, Antony was forced into retreat. Thousands of his soldiers died of hunger, disease, or exhaustion. By the time he reached safety, the dream of an Eastern empire was gone. Broken and humiliated, Antony returned to Alexandria. Cleopatra met him with comfort, not reproach. Together they turned defeat into triumph. In 34 BC, Antony staged a grand procession in Alexandria, a Roman triumph in everything but location. He paraded captured kings and treasures through the streets as the people cheered. Cleopatra sat beside him dressed as Isis, and Antony declared their children rulers of vast eastern lands. Alexander Helios as king of Armenia and Parthia, Cleopatra Selene as queen of Cyrenaica, and their youngest, Ptolemy Philadelphus, as king of Syria. The ceremony became known as the Donations of Alexandria. It was spectacle on an imperial scale, and it sent shockwaves through Rome. Antony appeared to be creating a new dynasty in the east, one that placed Egypt at its center and Cleopatra as queen of queens. Worst of all, he named Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as the legitimate heir of Caesar's legacy. To Octavian, who claimed that title for himself, it was nothing less than treason. In the Senate and in the streets, Antony's enemies seized on every detail. They said he had become a slave to a foreign queen, that he dressed in Eastern robes and called himself a god. They accused Cleopatra of witchcraft, claiming she had bewitched him with her beauty and her poison. Whether people believed the rumors or not, the damage was done. By 32 BC, the alliance between Antony and Octavian collapsed completely. Octavian's propaganda machine worked relentlessly. He published Antony's will, allegedly stolen from the Temple of the Vestal Virgins. It revealed Antony's desire to be buried beside Cleopatra in Alexandria. To Roman ears, it was proof that he had betrayed his homeland. That same year, Octavian persuaded the Senate to declare war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. It was a masterstroke. He framed the conflict not as another civil war, but as a crusade to save Rome from the corruption of an Eastern temptress. The people rallied to him, and the legions prepared for battle. Antony and Cleopatra gathered their own forces in Greece, determined to resist. Between them they commanded more than 200,000 soldiers and 500 warships, the largest fleet assembled since the time of Alexander. Their combined armies were formidable, but unity was fragile. Many of Antony's Roman officers distrusted Cleopatra and doubted his judgment. The confrontation came on the 2nd of September, 31 BC, near the western coast of Greece, at a place called Actium. Antony's fleet anchored in the Gulf of Ambracia, while Octavian's navy, commanded by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, blockaded the entrance. What followed was not only a battle for power, but for the soul of Rome itself. As dawn broke over the Ionian Sea, oarsmen took their places, and the air filled with the clash of drums. Antony's ships were massive, some with bronze rams and towers for archers. Cleopatra's vessels flew Egyptian banners, glittering under the sun. Across the water, Octavian's fleet waded smaller, faster, disciplined. For hours, the two sides circled and maneuvered, neither willing to commit. Then, as the wind shifted, Agrippa struck. His lighter ships darted in and out, setting Antony's lumbering galleys ablaze. Smoke covered the sea. The noise was deafening. Antony fought bravely, directing his men from the deck of his flagship, but confusion spread through his ranks. In the chaos, Cleopatra made a fateful decision. She ordered her squadron to break from the line and sail for open water. Seeing her fleet retreat, Antony made a choice that would seal his fate. He left the battle and followed her. Behind him, his navy collapsed. Those who remained were cut down or surrendered. By nightfall, Actium was lost. The lovers fled south to Alexandria. Octavian followed, methodical and relentless. Over the next year, Antony's allies deserted him. Provinces declared for Rome. His legions melted away. The once mighty general of Caesar's wars was now a fugitive in his own kingdom. In the summer of 30 BC, Octavian marched into Egypt. Alexandria fell after brief resistance. Facing defeat, Antony chose the only end a Roman could accept. He fell on his sword. As he lay dying, he was brought to Cleopatra, who had locked herself in her mausoleum. Legend says she cradled him as he breathed his last, the city outside surrendering to their enemy. Cleopatra's story did not end there. Octavian demanded that she appear before him in chains to be paraded through Rome. The queen refused. A week later, she took her own life by poison, according to most accounts, perhaps the bite of an asp hidden in a basket of figs. Whatever the means, her death was deliberate. She would not live to be a trophy of conquest. She was 39 years old. With their deaths, the long struggle for Rome ended. Octavian stood unchallenged, the last man left standing from the years of civil war. In time, he would take a new name Augustus and rule as the first emperor of Rome. The Republic was dead. The empire was born. Antony and Cleopatra were buried together somewhere near Alexandria, though their tomb has never been found. Over the centuries, their story has been told and retold, a tale of ambition, passion, and the price of power. To some, they were doomed lovers. To others, they were visionaries who tried to bridge two worlds. Whatever the truth, their legacy endures. The soldier and the queen who defied Rome did not survive, but the world they helped to create did, a world of empire, of glory, and of legend. After the smoke of Actium cleared, the Mediterranean lay silent. The last great fleet of the Republic was gone. The world that had once been divided between Antony and Octavian was now firmly tilting toward one man. Yet the victors in Rome were cautious. Though Antony's forces had been broken, he and Cleopatra still commanded Egypt, the richest land on earth. Octavian could not yet declare victory until Alexandria itself had fallen. For Antony, the months following Actium were a long descent. His confidence, once unshakable, had evaporated. His allies across the eastern provinces abandoned him, seeking favor with Octavian. Even Herod, the client king of Judea whom Antony himself had raised to power, declared loyalty to Rome. Antony's generals defected one by one. Desertion spread through his remaining legions. The army that had once feared nothing now feared starvation. Cleopatra, ever pragmatic, prepared for the inevitable. She still possessed Egypt's treasury, and with it the ability to bargain. At times she dreamed of escaping, perhaps to India, perhaps across the desert to Nubia, but these were fantasies. Rome's reach extended too far. Instead, she fortified Alexandria, stocked its granaries, and raised what remained of her navy. She was determined to make her last stand as a queen. Within the palace walls, the mood was desperate. The love that had once bound Antony and Cleopatra had changed. It was still strong, but it was now shaped by fear. They had built their lives on ambition. Now they shared the ruin of it. Cleopatra was still calculating, still looking for survival. Antony, weary of politics, longed for the battlefield. It was all he had ever known. By the spring of 30 BC, Octavian's armies had reached Egypt. His campaign was swift and precise. The legions marched along the coast from Syria and entered the Nile Delta with little resistance. Cities opened their gates. The people of Egypt, exhausted by years of taxation and war, did not rise for their queen. The end was near. Antony rode out to meet the enemy, but there was no army left to lead. When his cavalry clashed with Octavian's advance guard near Alexandria, his men broke ranks and surrendered. The final blow came not from the battlefield, but from betrayal within his own command. One of his officers, believing the war already lost, spread a false rumor that Cleopatra was dead. When the news reached Antony, he was shattered. He had lost battles before, but never her. In despair, he drew his sword and fell upon it. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had taken refuge with her most loyal servants. According to ancient accounts, the queen ordered that Antony be lifted through a window by ropes. Bleeding and broken, he died in her arms. His last words, they say, were not of war or empire, but of love, that she not grieve too long, that she live, if only to beg mercy for their children. Cleopatra's world collapsed around her. For days she refused food and saw no one. Octavian sent envoys, demanding her surrender. She met them dressed in her royal robes, her crown still upon her head. She told them she would live only if allowed to rule Egypt in the name of her sons. It was a hopeless plea, but she made it with dignity. Octavian entered Alexandria soon after. He was only 33, young, disciplined, and utterly without mercy. He had admired Antony once, but now he looked upon the man's fate as a warning. Octavian visited the tomb where Antony's body lay and wept, whether from grief or from politics, no one knew. He then summoned Cleopatra to appear before him. The queen refused. She feared being paraded through Rome in chains, displayed to the jeering crowds as the trophy of a Roman triumph. Octavian insisted she would be treated with honor, but Cleopatra understood what honor meant in the language of conquerors. Determined to control her own fate, she devised one final act of defiance. On the 12th of August, 30 BC, she bathed, dined, and dressed in her most splendid garments, gold and white linen, the symbols of Isis. She received a small basket of figs, brought by a loyal servant, and within it, according to legend, was hidden an asp, the sacred serpent of Egypt. Some ancient writers claim she drank poison. Others insist the snake struck her breast. However it happened, the result was the same. Cleopatra, last pharaoh of Egypt, died on her own terms. When Octavian's soldiers broke into her chamber, they found her lying on a couch of gold, her attendants Iras and Charmian dead beside her. Her face was calm, as though she had fallen asleep. Charmian, barely alive, was asked if this was well done. "Very well," she replied, "and worthy of a queen." Then she too died. Octavian stood over the bodies of the woman and man who had nearly undone Rome. He ordered that they be buried together, as Cleopatra had wished. Their tomb was built near the sea, filled with gold and relics of their reign. Its location has been lost to time, but legend says it still lies beneath the sands near modern Alexandria, awaiting rediscovery. With their deaths, the last chapter of Egypt's independence closed. The kingdom of the pharaohs, which had stood for 3,000 years, became a Roman province. Octavian took control of its immense wealth and grain supply, ensuring that the city of Rome would never again starve. Caesarion, the young son of Caesar and Cleopatra, was captured and executed, a grim necessity, Octavian claimed, for there could be only one Caesar. The queen's surviving children by Antony were spared. Octavian sent them to Rome, where they were raised by his sister Octavia, Antony's Roman wife. History would lose sight of them after that. Octavian's triumph was complete. He returned to Rome a hero, celebrated as the man who ended generations of civil war. In 27 BC, he took a new title, Augustus, and became the first emperor of Rome. The Republic, in all but name, was gone. What replaced it was an empire that would endure for centuries. Yet for all his victories, Augustus could never entirely erase the memory of Antony and Cleopatra. Their story became legend almost immediately. Roman writers turned them into symbols: Antony, the warrior undone by lust and pride; Cleopatra, the enchantress who brought noble men to ruin. Poets like Horace and Virgil wrote verses praising Rome's triumph over Eastern decadence. Painters and sculptors portrayed Cleopatra's death as both horror and beauty, the serpent coiled on her arm, the empire rising from her fall. But as centuries passed, another image emerged, one less Roman and more human. Historians of later ages began to see in Antony and Cleopatra not villains, but tragic lovers caught between duty and desire. Their bond, forged in the furnace of politics, had become a romance that transcended power. The Greek biographer Plutarch, writing a century later, described their affection as genuine. He said Cleopatra was not the seductress of myth, but a woman of wit and intellect whose charm lay more in her voice than in her beauty. For her talk, he wrote, had an irresistible charm, and her tongue, like an instrument of many strings, could turn to any language she pleased. By the time William Shakespeare retold their story, more than 1,500 years later, the transformation was complete. In Antony and Cleopatra, he portrayed them as grand figures, proud, flawed, magnificent. The stage became their empire, and death their final triumph. "Let Rome in Tiber melt," Antony declares, "and the wide arch of the ranged empire fall." In those words, the soldier who once fought for Caesar becomes the lover who would abandon the world for a queen. In truth, neither Antony nor Cleopatra could have escaped their fate. They lived in an age when ambition was everything and mercy was weakness. Each had risen higher than their birth allowed: Antony, the soldier from a minor Roman house; Cleopatra, the woman who ruled among kings. Together, they dreamed of a union between East and West, of a world not bound by Rome's Senate or Egypt's priests, but by their own vision. History was not ready for such a dream. Still, their influence endured. Cleopatra's Egypt became the crown jewel of the Roman Empire, supplying grain and wealth that fed generations. Alexandria remained the intellectual heart of the ancient world, its library a beacon of knowledge long after its founders were gone. The imagery of their lives, the golden barge, the jeweled throne, the serpent's bite, lingered in art and imagination. From Renaissance paintings to modern film, their story has been retold endlessly, proof that even in defeat, their legend triumphed. And perhaps that is fitting, for Antony and Cleopatra were never truly conquered. They were undone, yes, but not forgotten. The empire that rose from their ashes carried their memory like a shadow. Every emperor who came after Augustus ruled over the lands they once dreamed to unite: Rome and Egypt, sword and crown, power and passion. 2,000 years later, their names still evoke not just history, but the eternal struggle between love and ambition. They remind us that even the greatest empires are built by human hands, and that sometimes the heart can be as deadly as the sword. Antony and Cleopatra, the soldier and the queen, the power couple who changed history. When Antony and Cleopatra died in the summer of 30 BC, the world they had known vanished with them. Their story ended in tragedy, but for Rome, it marked the beginning of something new: a world empire. Out of the ashes of their defeat, Octavian built a political order that would last for centuries. The Republic was dead. In its place stood the Roman Empire. And at its foundation lay the lessons of Antony's ambition and Cleopatra's defiance. Octavian moved swiftly to consolidate his rule. He understood that Rome was exhausted by war. For nearly 50 years, its citizens had seen their leaders fight one another, Marius and Sulla, Pompey and Caesar, then Antony and Octavian himself. The people longed for peace. Octavian promised to give it to them. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as the restorer of order. He took the title princeps, meaning first citizen, and claimed to rule only with the Senate's consent. In reality, every lever of power rested in his hands: the army, the treasury, the provinces. His control was absolute, but his image was measured. He was not another Caesar, he told the people. He was the guardian of Rome's destiny. In 27 BC, he accepted a new name, Augustus. With it, he began the imperial age. Egypt became his personal possession, not a standard province governed by senators. It was far too important for that. Its grain fed the empire, its gold filled Rome's vaults, and its port at Alexandria became a vital hub of trade between the Mediterranean and the East. To govern Egypt, Augustus sent only men of his choosing, equestrians, loyal not to the Senate but to him. The land that had once belonged to Cleopatra now served as the emperor's private domain. Under Augustus, Egypt was both prized and watched carefully. Roman soldiers patrolled the Nile, and local priests were made to swear oaths of loyalty. Yet Alexandria remained a place apart, a city of scholars, merchants, and mystics. Here, Greek, Egyptian, and Roman cultures blended, continuing the cosmopolitan spirit Cleopatra had once championed. Even as Rome tightened its grip, her influence lingered in the city's temples and schools. The Romans had long feared the East. They saw it as a place of luxury, excess, and soft living. Everything they believed could corrupt a soldier's virtue. Antony's downfall, in their eyes, proved those fears true. Roman writers like Horace and Propertius celebrated Augustus as the man who saved Rome from the seductions of an Eastern queen. Cleopatra was portrayed as the embodiment of temptation, Antony as the general undone by passion. This image suited Augustus well. It turned his victory into a moral triumph. Rome, they said, had not only defeated its enemies but also defended its purity. The official story spread through art, coins, and monuments was clear. The East had bowed before the West, and the Republic's glory had been reborn through empire. But beneath the propaganda, something deeper was happening. As Rome absorbed Egypt, it also absorbed its culture. Egyptian art, fashion, and religion spread across the empire. Temples dedicated to Isis appeared in cities from Pompeii to London. Roman women copied Cleopatra's hairstyles and jewelry. Even Augustus, who had vilified her in his speeches, could not escape her influence. The fascination with Egypt, its mystery, its gods, its gold captivated the Roman imagination. In this way, Cleopatra won a victory of her own. She had lost her kingdom, but she conquered Rome's culture. The same empire that condemned her would come to worship her image. As the decades passed, Antony and Cleopatra's story became legend. Each generation retold it in its own way. To the Romans, it was a cautionary tale about pride and lust. To the Greeks, it was a story of noble defeat. To the Egyptians, whispered in secret, it was the last chapter of their ancient sovereignty. The Greek historian Plutarch, writing around the year 100 AD, shaped much of what the world would later remember. His life of Antony portrayed the general not as a villain, but as a tragic hero, brave, generous, and fatally human. Cleopatra, in Plutarch's account, was no mere seductress. She was intelligent, multilingual, and politically shrewd. He wrote that her beauty was not in itself so remarkable that none could compare with her, but the contact of her presence, if you lived with her, was irresistible. It was a portrait that captured the tension between reality and myth, two people larger than life, brought down not only by their enemies but by their own flaws. Under the emperors who followed Augustus, Rome continued to revere its new Egyptian prize. The city of Rome itself was transformed by its influence. Obelisks from the Nile were transported across the sea and raised in the capital as monuments to victory. One still stands today in St. Peter's Square, a relic of Cleopatra's world in the heart of modern Rome. Trade with the East flourished. Ships from Alexandria carried spices, silk, and ivory to Roman ports. Scholars in the city studied astronomy and medicine using texts copied from the Great Library. The empire that had once conquered Egypt now depended on it. Yet for all the wealth it brought, Egypt remained a place of unease in the Roman mind. It was too ancient, too mystical, too different. Its religion spoke of life beyond death. Its rulers had been worshipped as gods. Even emperors like Hadrian and Nero, who visited the Nile centuries later, found themselves drawn into its spell. Cleopatra's legacy, it seemed, could not be erased. While Egypt became the jewel of Augustus's empire, Antony's memory was deliberately diminished. Statues of him were removed, his name omitted from public monuments. The man who had once commanded the armies of Caesar was reduced in Roman memory to a cautionary tale, a warning against passion and pride. But history has a way of remembering what power tries to forget. Generations later, poets and dramatists rediscovered their story. In the Middle Ages, Cleopatra appeared in chronicles as both temptress and scholar, a queen of beauty and knowledge. By the Renaissance, she became the symbol of tragic love. Artists painted her death again and again, her pale skin, the asp curled upon her arm, the golden chamber of her final moments. Mark Antony, too, was reimagined no longer a traitor, but a hero undone by fate. His courage, his loyalty, his recklessness, these qualities spoke to an age that admired passion more than prudence. Their story became a mirror in which every generation saw its own reflection of love and loss. When William Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra in the early 1600s, he drew on Plutarch's words but transformed them into poetry. His Antony is a man torn between duty and desire, his Cleopatra a woman of wit and fire. Together, they rise and fall like empires. Their love becomes a rebellion against the cold order of politics, a human defiance of power itself. "Give me my robe," she cries before her death. "Put on my crown, I have immortal longings in me." Through Shakespeare, Antony and Cleopatra entered immortality. They ceased to be figures of history and became symbols of passion's power, of the collision between love and empire, of the way humanity endures even in the shadow of greatness. From the stage of London to the art of Europe, their story spread, crossing borders and centuries. Painters like Tiepolo and Delacroix, poets like Dryden and Shelley, all returned to their myth, each finding something new in its tragedy. The modern world, too, has kept their legend alive. The film Cleopatra of 1963, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, retold their tale for a new generation of production as lavish and tempestuous as the lovers themselves. It captured not just the spectacle of their world, but also the danger of their love, that when passion and power intertwine, both can destroy. And yet, beneath the romance, the politics, and the myth, the story of Antony and Cleopatra remains deeply human. It is the story of two people who stood at the crossroads of history, one born into the heart of Rome's ambition, the other into the last breath of Egypt's glory. They met not as strangers but as equals, bound by the same hunger for greatness and the same defiance of fate. In them, we see the eternal paradox of power, that those who reach the highest often fall the hardest. Antony's courage could win empires, but it could not save him from himself. Cleopatra's intellect could charm conquerors, but it could not conquer Rome. Together they dreamed of a world united, and in trying to create it, they destroyed the one that existed. Still, their failure changed everything. The wars they fought, the alliances they broke, the world they reshaped all paved the way for the empire that followed. Without their rise and fall, Augustus might never have claimed the throne. Without Egypt's wealth, Rome might never have endured. Their love, their ambition, their downfall, each was a thread in the vast tapestry of history. Even now, their story endures because it speaks to something timeless. Power fades, but passion does not. Empires crumble, but the memory of those who dared to love greatly remains. Antony and Cleopatra's names have become inseparable, not because of what they ruled, but because of what they risked. In a world where loyalty meant survival, they chose each other. And though history condemned them, it could not silence them. In the end, perhaps that is their greatest victory. Even 2,000 years after their deaths, Antony and Cleopatra continue to captivate the imagination. Their story has been told and retold, adapted into plays, novels, films, and paintings. Yet beyond the spectacle of their lives, historians continue to study them for insight into the politics, culture, and human nature of their era. One of the enduring questions is simple. Were Antony and Cleopatra truly a romantic pair, or was their union primarily political? Ancient sources are divided. Roman historians, writing under Augustus, portrayed Cleopatra as a seductress who ensnared Antony, turning a loyal Roman general into a puppet. Cassius Dio and Plutarch suggest that Antony's military failures were caused by his love for her. Octavian's propaganda amplified this narrative, framing Cleopatra as the foreign temptress whose influence endangered Rome. Modern historians, however, take a more nuanced view. They argue that Cleopatra was not a manipulative seductress, but a shrewd monarch navigating a dangerous world. Antony, they suggest, was not seduced blindly but chose to ally with her because their union served mutual interests. Together, they controlled the richest regions of the Mediterranean, commanding armies, navies, and wealth that rivaled the Roman state. Their personal bond may have been genuine, but their political partnership was equally important. Archaeological evidence continues to shed light on their world. Excavations in Alexandria have revealed grand palaces, temples, and artifacts that reflect the opulence described in ancient texts. Coins minted during Antony and Cleopatra's reign show them as rulers of equal status, emphasizing Cleopatra's authority rather than portraying her as merely Antony's consort. Scholars debate the location of their tomb, which remains one of history's great mysteries. Some suggest it lies near the ancient royal quarter of Alexandria. Others speculate it sank beneath the waters of the harbor after earthquakes and flooding. Regardless, the search itself reflects the enduring fascination with their story. Their cultural impact extends far beyond the ancient world. Artists from the Renaissance onward have drawn inspiration from their tale. Painters such as Guido Reni, Tiepolo, and Jean-Léon Gérôme captured Cleopatra's fatal beauty and Antony's tragic heroism. Writers, from Shakespeare to modern novelists, have explored their themes: ambition, love, betrayal, and the collision between personal desire and political duty. Each retelling emphasizes different aspects, but all return to the same central question: how do love and power intersect, and what price must be paid for either? In the realm of popular culture, Antony and Cleopatra remain icons. Films such as the 1963 epic starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton brought their story to a global audience, depicting both the grandeur of their world and the intensity of their passion. Documentaries continue to examine the historical facts behind the legend, combining scholarship with vivid reconstructions to remind viewers that these were real people, not just mythic figures. The story also resonates because of its human dimensions. Antony and Cleopatra were ambitious, intelligent, and daring, yet they were mortal. They faced impossible choices, battled rivals, and ultimately succumbed to forces larger than themselves. Their love, their mistakes, and their courage create a narrative that is timeless. It reminds us that even in a world dominated by politics and power, human emotion remains a force of immense consequence. Historians today continue to reinterpret their tale in the context of gender, culture, and empire. Cleopatra, in particular, challenges stereotypes about women in power. She ruled successfully in a male-dominated world, spoke multiple languages, and maintained Egypt's independence for decades. Antony, meanwhile, exemplifies the tension between personal loyalty and public duty. Their lives intersect at the crossroads of history, where the personal and the political collide. Ultimately, the legacy of Antony and Cleopatra is multifaceted. They were conquerors and lovers, monarchs and mortals, figures of history and subjects of myth. Their story illustrates the fragility of power, that empires can rise and fall, that ambition can be both heroic and fatal, and that love can shape the course of nations. Their deaths did not end their influence. Instead, they transformed it, inspiring generations to come. Even today, as scholars debate the precise details of their lives, as artists recreate their image, and as the sands of Egypt conceal the secrets of their tomb, Antony and Cleopatra continue to teach us about ambition, desire, and the human capacity for greatness and tragedy. They are more than historical figures. They are symbols of the eternal struggle between love and power, between dreams and reality. In their brief but extraordinary lives, they changed the world. In death, they changed history. And in memory, they endure forever.